Hey there, scientists. Today, we are talking about models of food chains, and you are going to be able to use a model to describe that energy in animals' food was once energy from the sun. Let's do this, scientists. Hey there, scientists. I am Mr. Steier, and this is Mr. Steier's Classroom. Today, we are talking about food chain models. And the food chain models are going to look a lot like if you got a chance to play the Eat or Be Eaten game from the extras on the last lesson. If you got a chance to do that, it's going to look a lot like that, and that's going to give you a lot of support going forward in today's lesson. But your job is that you can use a model to describe that energy in an animal's food was once energy from the sun. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to reflect back on what we have been talking about. Started talking about plants and the process of photosynthesis. We moved from that into talking about where do animals get their food. We moved from that to talking about how are the plants and the animals connected in a food chain, and we identified the answer to this question: what is a food chain? And you now know that a food chain is the path by which energy flows from one living thing to another. Now, what are parts that are in a food chain? If we think back to our rainforest food chain that we worked on in our last lesson, or we think back to that pond food chain from our last lesson, you know that every food chain is going to include the sun, it's going to include producers and consumers. Some of you, I know, are already adding in decomposers on the other end of the food chain, and that really gets to be where we start building from a food chain to a food web when we talk about how all of these different models, these chains, are connected. And now remember, in a food chain, what do our arrows show? The arrows show the direction in which the energy flows. So our arrows are showing us which way the energy is flowing. So today, we are going to use a model. And you have learned that all animals need energy to grow. They need energy to move, and they need energy to repair their bodies. You've also seen some ways animals get this energy from the environment through food chains. Now it is your turn. Using your own research, you are doing your own research. You are going to make and present a model food chain for an environment. The food chain should include at least 2 different kinds of animals. So let's dig into it here by just looking at this image of the African savanna on the right side of this page. So we can see here the sun is the original source of energy in every food chain on the African savanna. And the sun is the original source of energy for every food chain that we're going to encounter in every food chain that we build. So let's just look at this image and let's think about what is it that we notice. Well, after reading the caption, we should definitely notice the sun, right? So we notice the sun, and we know the sun is the start of every food chain. Well, what are other things that we notice if we look at this image? The elephant, yeah, I noticed that too. The giraffes, right? Yes, and the grasses. So we have a sun here, we have some elephants, a giraffe, and some grasses. So in this image alone, do we have a food chain? Well, we do indeed. We could say that the sun, the energy from the sun, and we could draw an arrow that goes straight down to the grass, gives energy to the grass. We could say that then the grass grows and gives energy to the elephant. Now, are giraffes going to eat that elephant? Yeah, no, they're not. They are not going to. So we would have the sun to the grass to the giraffe. But our elephant and our giraffe and our elephant, they are not connected in a straight line as we saw in our previous models. We're going to go sun to the producer to a consumer, sun to a producer to a consumer. Now, if we were going to add something on the back side, on the other side, that would get its energy from a giraffe or get its energy from an elephant, what are other consumers that you might be thinking of that are going to eat an elephant or going to eat a giraffe? Lion is a great answer. Yes, a lion would take down either an elephant or a giraffe and then be a carnivore that's going to eat the meat of that elephant or that giraffe. And the other one would be a hyena. So we could have a hyena on the other side of that food chain as well. So when we look at this image, what are the producers? They're the grasses, correct. What are the consumers? The elephant and the giraffe. So, could you use the organisms in this photo to draw a food chain of the African savanna? It would go to the sun, to the grass, to the elephant, or the sun to the grass to the giraffe. The elephant and the giraffe, they would not be connected. Remember, we would add in a hyena or a lion that would then eat the elephant, or a hyena or a lion that would eat the giraffe, and that would finish off that model for us. So, in this activity, what you need to do today is you need to, number one, ask a question. And the question is, how can you use a model to describe that energy in an animal's food was once energy from the sun? So that's the question that you have to answer. How can you use a model to describe that energy in an animal's food was once energy from the sun? So your second step here is you need to research an environment. You're going to have to do some independent, on your own research about different environments, habitats, or ecosystems that you're familiar with. So here we're doing the African savanna. Maybe you wanted to do a forest. Maybe you wanted to do the Arctic. Maybe you wanted to do a desert. We've seen that. We've seen a rainforest. Maybe you wanted to have a rainforest food chain. Maybe you wanted a lake food chain or an ocean food chain. You have to pick your own environment, your own habitat, in order to be able to move forward in this process. So, first thing you do is you pick an environment that you would like to learn about. Then you're going to use print and online reference materials to discover what kinds of plants and animals live in that environment. Be sure to record the source of the information that you found it. So I know that many of us are going to use PebbleGo or PebbleGo Next. You would say that PebbleGo Next is the source of your information, so we know where you're getting your information from. After you have some information, you need to think about the organisms you've identified. What are the producers in that environment you chose? What are what consumers eat those producers? And what consumers eat those consumers? You have to identify one or two pathways that energy takes through the environment. And then you are actually going to be using Google Slide and building your own model. All right, that moves us into step 3. You need to assemble your model. How are you going to make your model food chain? Now, some of you might be using index cards, some of you might be using clay to make your model, or a computer slideshow presentation software, which we are set up for you to be able to use Google Slides to build your model. Include labels for each step in the chain. Your labels should give a brief description of how each organism gets the energy. So how is it that they're getting the energy? You may need to analyze and revise your model in step 4. Do research to find another plant or animal from your selected environment. Add this organism to your model food chain. So just like in our savanna, we had to add in a lion or a hyena because we don't see it in this image. So we had to add that in to make certain we had a complete food chain. And then step 5 is you're going to present your model. Now this is going to look different for all of us. When you've revised your model, you're going to present your model food chain to your class. You're going to point out how each organism in the food chain gets its energy for life processes. Then you're going to use your model to explain how all food energy was once energy from the sun. It is important that everyone understands that all of this energy is coming from the sun. And that is really what your goal is that you can use a model to describe that energy in an animal's food was once energy from the sun. Your presentation is going to look different depending on your teacher, your class, and your current situation. So you'll get more information on that when you need it. You are using digital or print materials. Maybe you have some books available to you in your classroom or at home or from the library that are going to help you to expand on your knowledge of a habitat. You are going to do some research and you are going to find some images that match that habitat in order to be able to create the model of a food chain and show how energy is passed in that food chain. Then we're going to come back together and you're going to have an opportunity to share your model in some way. It might just be that you're only sharing your model with your teacher and your teacher is going to give you feedback on it. It might be that you're sharing your model with a family member or a stuffed animal or a pet or your whole class. That will be determined by your particular situation. Make certain that you are using valid sources. Again, I know a lot of us are going to use PebbleGo and PebbleGo Next. Those sources that are available to us in the library page of our school site. Because we know that those are valid sources that are going to have good information for us. Because we have to have accurate information. Work hard on your model. There is an example in the lesson here that you'll be able to see how I finished off our Savannah model so you could see it. Be a critical thinker. Find a unique ecosystem if you can. Find a unique and curious food chain where maybe you want to know how a food chain works for a narwhal. Maybe you want to know how a food chain works for a grizzly bear. Maybe you want to know how a food chain works for a salamander. Because in every one of these situations, we are always asking ourselves the same question. When you see an animal, you say, what does it eat and what eats it? And that gives us both sides of our food chain. Be a critical thinker. Think like a scientist. That is what we are doing today. And you can say that you can use a model to describe that energy in an animal's food was once energy from the sun. I am Mr. Steier, and this is Mr. Steier's Classroom. Thanks for being with me today, scientist, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!